Hello, friend, and welcome to another 10 in 10 episode on all things people change. I'm your host, Mel Loy, and I'm recording this episode on the lands of the Yagara and Turrbal people here in Meanjin, Brisbane. And today's episode is the fourth in our 5-part series, so we're 75% of the way there, if I did my math right. And these episodes are where I share my comms tips and tricks for different kinds of people-related changes that we typically encounter in most organisations. And today we'll be talking about policy and benefits changes. So when the organisation has made a decision to update a policy, bring in a new one, or change employee benefits, what's the best way to communicate? Now, the problem I often see is organisations not putting in enough effort into these types of changes. Sometimes they are literally just an automated message from a central HR system, and you just have to tick to say, I've read and understood. I've seen systems that don't even let you read it before you tick that box. You've got to tick the box to read it, which is ridiculous. Other times it might be that you need to sign a piece of paper to say that you've read and understood this document. Or you might just get some kind of arbitrary, vague comm saying something has been updated, go look at it. Now, honestly, it's really lazy. It is lazy communication. And it's also not helping your audience, especially if there are new rules or procedures that they should be abiding by. It is setting them up to fail. And therefore, it's also setting up the broader business for increased risk. So instead of a tick and flick approach, I'm going to share a few ways that you can actually make sure that not only do people read what's changed, but they understand it and they act on it. So let's get into it. Tip number 1, be clear on what's changing and what's not. This is really important if a policy or procedure has changed or benefits are changed. Be very clear on what's different and what is staying the same. So it could literally just be you have a table with 2 columns, and the first column is previous policy. Second column is updated policy. And it might be that in the previous policy column, for example, AI could not be used at all. In the updated policy, you can use these tools, X, Y, Z. When it comes to employee benefits, this is also super important. Nobody wants to feel like they are losing benefits. So not only do you need to talk about what's changing, but also why it's better than the previous version, and talk about what's not changing as well. So if there is something that is really important to people that people really like, mention that it's staying. Now, importantly, make sure that this kind of information, the what's changing, what's not, is right up the front of your communication. People will not read long emails or long policy documents. We know that. So make this comparison front and center. So that's tip number 1, be clear on what's changing and what's not. Which brings us to tip number 2, keeping it simple. Now, this means a couple of things. Firstly, the language you use in policy documents and related communications needs to be simple and easy to understand. Now, all too often, we see these documents and comms written in very technical HR language, full of jargon. And we know that we need to be communicating at the level of a 14-year-old in order to effectively reach 83% of our audience. When you start to communicate at a higher level than that, the understanding drops off pretty significantly and fast. So, as you are developing these documents and the comms, check to make sure the language is clear and simple. And test it with your intended audience. They will be able to tell you pretty quickly if something is confusing or it doesn't make sense. Also, don't think that you can just get away with throwing a glossary in there to explain away the jargon. The research tells us that actually adding a glossary of terms doesn't help understanding at all. Now, keeping it simple also relates to the layout of the documents themselves. And like I said, people very rarely read long emails or let alone documents. So what I like to do when I help clients develop policy suites is to put a key points box right at the top of the document. And that is 3 to 5 maximum 3 to 5 dot points with the main things people need to know. And I'm talking 1 sentence dot points, not paragraphs. If you're not sure what to put there, think about the things that people ask about all the time or where they often get tripped up. So where they make mistakes, they don't realize they're not abiding with policy. If they read nothing else, at least they will read those 3 to 5 key points and get the main idea. And those 3 to 5 key points can be used in all your comms, they can be used on an intranet site, whatever it might be. Avoid big blocks of text and instead use really short, sharp dot points or even simple diagrams like flowcharts to help people navigate and understand the content. So that's tip number 2, keep it simple. Tip number 3, apart from using simple language, also use tangible examples of the policy or procedure in practice. So you want to make this policy meaningful for your audience. They need to understand, what does this mean for me? So when you are describing a key policy point or even a benefit, ask yourself, what does this actually mean to my audience? So let's use an AI policy again as an example, because there's a lot of those happening right now. You might have something in there that talks about, let's say, an employee persona called Jane, and Jane wants to use ChatGPT to help draft an email. She decides to copy and paste in an email she'd written previously. This is a bad idea because blah, blah, blah. And then you have Sam, who also wants to use ChatGPT to help draft an email. So he provides general information in the prompt without using any names or identifying features. This is okay because blah, blah, blah. So you'll have an example of what to do, an example of what not to do, and brings that policy to life. Now, you don't need to have these examples in the policy document yourself. In fact, probably doesn't really sit in there a lot of the time. But what I've done is put these in a guideline document that goes with the policy, or in the comms, or both. But think about what the policy means for different audience groups as well. So for example, a policy about delegations of authority, so who's allowed to spend how much money, will mean different things to a frontline team member versus a senior leader. So you might need to have a few different scenarios in there. If you've got any FAQs to go along with the changes, I'd also recommend copying and pasting these scenarios in there too. And the more repetitions, the better. And the final tip, check understanding, not just the I've read and understood tick and flick. So the tick and flick method isn't going to cut it, like I've said, but instead what you could do is maybe have a short quiz on the policy or the changes. So for example, 5 multiple choice questions, and that's linked to employees' profiles, so you can monitor who has and who hasn't properly read the documents. Another idea, in team meetings or toolbox talks, a couple of people on the team are assigned to explain the new policy or procedure or benefits to the rest of the team. So it means they have to learn about it. It also means they are going to put it in language that their team members, their colleagues understand, but also they're more likely to be listened to because they are a trusted peer, not just some random guy or woman who's come in from head office to talk about it. Now, when reading the policy online, if your system allows this, you could have a question or something that people need to respond to before they're allowed to say that they've read and understood the policy. So, for example, it could be a question like, what does this policy mean for you and your role? Now, hopefully you can build in some smarts around the system so people can't just write not applicable or whatever. But again, you will not only be able to see who has read the document, but how will they understand it too. And then you can target any follow-up that's required. Okay, that's our episode. Told you it was short, sharp and sweet, which means it is time for our wrap-up. And today I shared 4 tips to make sure new policies or procedures or changes to existing documents or benefits, for example, are not just read, but really understood so they will actually put into practice. Step number 1 or tip number 1 was be clear on what's changing, how it compares to any previous versions, and what's not changing. Explain the why and the benefits where appropriate. Tip number 2, keep it simple. This means the language you use and also the way you lay out these documents. So consider having a key points box right at the top and using diagrams where possible to replace a lot of lengthy step-by-step text. Tip number 3, use scenarios or avatars to make the words meaningful. So for example, using a persona like Jane, the manager, who now has to follow an updated finance policy and talk about what's good practice and what's not. And tip number 4, check people's understanding properly, not just a tick and flick or sign a piece of paper. So consider using things like quizzes, asking team members to explain it to their peers, etc., etc. All right, team, that's your episode for today. That was our 4th of our 5th in our series of people changes. So we've got 1 more to go. And the next one is a change that's happening everywhere. It's all about new technology. So stay tuned for that next week. In the meantime, keep doing amazing things and bye for now.